On August 14, 1958, the world's biggest rock and roll star received the kind of phone call that shatters souls. Private Elvis Aaron Presley, stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, learned that his beloved mother, his anchor, his confidante, his everything was dying. In that moment, the king of rock and roll became just a heartbroken son in uniform, racing against time to say goodbye to the woman who had shaped every note he ever sang. This is the story of how grief in olive drab changed Elvis forever, transforming both his music and his soul in ways that would echo through eternity. On August 14, 1958, the world's biggest rock and roll star received the kind of phone call that shatters souls. Private Elvis Aaron Presley, stationed at Fort Hood, Texas, learned that his beloved mother, his anchor, his confidante, his everything was dying. In that moment, the king of rock and roll became just a heartbroken son in uniform, racing against time to say goodbye to the woman who had shaped every note he ever sang. This is the story of how grief in olive drab changed Elvis forever, transforming both his music and his soul in ways that would echo through eternity. When Elvis received his draft notice in December 1957, the news sent shockwaves through both the entertainment industry and the Presley household. At the height of his career, with hit songs dominating the charts and movies in production, the idea of America's most famous young man serving as a regular soldier seemed almost surreal. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, initially tried to arrange for his client to serve in special services, where he could entertain troops and maintain his career momentum. But Elvis surprised everyone by choosing to serve as a regular soldier. This decision reflected the values Gladys had instilled in him: humility, respect for duty, and a desire to prove himself worthy of the American dream that had lifted them from poverty. However, for Gladys, the prospect of her son leaving for military service triggered profound anxiety. She had already lost him to fame. Now she was losing him to the army, the woman who had rarely been separated from Elvis for more than a few days was facing the reality of months, possibly years, apart. Elvis reported for duty on March 24, 1958, at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, where the world watched as the king of rock and roll received the standard military buzz cut that symbolically stripped away his civilian identity. Photographers captured every moment, from his induction physical to his first meal in the mess hall. But behind the media circus, a more personal drama was unfolding. Gladys had accompanied Elvis to the base, and their goodbye was heart-wrenching for those who witnessed it. During basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, Elvis threw himself into military life with characteristic determination. He excelled at his duties, earned the respect of his fellow soldiers, and proved that despite his fame, he could function as part of a team. His commanding officers noted his professionalism and lack of prima donna behavior. However, the physical separation from his mother weighed heavily on both of them. They spoke by phone regularly, but Gladys's health continued to deteriorate, worsened by her drinking and the stress of separation. Letters between mother and son during this period reveal the depth of their emotional dependence on each other. Elvis wrote about his loneliness and his worry for her health, while Gladys expressed her pride in his service, but also her desperate longing for his return. By August 1958, Gladys Presley's health had reached a critical point. The combination of hepatitis, heart problems, excessive drinking, and diet pill abuse had ravaged her body. At just 46 years old, she looked far older, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by illness and depression. Vernon Presley and the family doctor grew increasingly concerned as Gladys became weaker and more disoriented. But she insisted she would recover once Elvis came home from Germany, where he was scheduled to be deployed. On August 12, 1958, Gladys was admitted to Methodist Hospital in Memphis, her condition serious enough to warrant immediate medical attention. The news reached Elvis at Fort Hood, where he was completing advanced training before his overseas deployment. His commanding officer, recognizing the gravity of the situation, granted him emergency leave to visit his ailing mother. Elvis made the frantic drive from Texas to Memphis, his mind racing with fear and desperate hope. When Elvis arrived at the hospital, he was shocked by his mother's appearance. The strong, protective woman who had been his rock looked frail and vulnerable in the hospital bed. Despite her weakened condition, Gladys rallied when she saw her son, and they spent precious hours together talking, holding hands, and trying to maintain hope for her recovery. Elvis refused to believe that this might be their final goodbye, clinging to the belief that his mother's indomitable spirit would pull her through as it always had. On August 13th, Elvis was forced to return to Fort Hood as his leave had expired and his deployment to Germany was imminent. The goodbye was agonizing for both of them. Gladys, despite her illness, tried to be strong for her son, telling him to take care of himself and promising to be better when he returned. Elvis kissed her goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time he would see his mother alive. In the early morning hours of August 14, 1958, Gladys Love Presley suffered a fatal heart attack. She was alone when she died, a fact that would torment Elvis for the rest of his life. The phone call that reached him at Fort Hood shattered his world completely. The news of his mother's death transformed Elvis from a disciplined soldier into a devastated son. Those who witnessed his reaction described it as primal and heartbreaking, a grown man reduced to inconsolable sobbing, calling out for his mama, in anguish that echoed through the barracks. His commanding officers, moved by the depth of his grief, immediately granted him emergency leave to attend the funeral and handle family affairs. The journey back to Memphis was a blur of pain and disbelief. Elvis, still in uniform, arrived at Graceland to find the mansion he had bought for his mother's happiness now draped in mourning. Fans and media surrounded the property, but for once, Elvis was oblivious to the crowds. He was consumed by guilt, wondering if the stress of his fame had contributed to his mother's death, if his absence during military service had accelerated her decline. The funeral service at the National Funeral Home in Memphis drew thousands of mourners. Elvis, wearing his army dress uniform, was inconsolable throughout the ceremony. Witnesses described him throwing himself on his mother's coffin, sobbing and speaking to her as if she could still hear him. "Goodbye, darling, goodbye," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I love you so much. You know how much I lived my whole life just for you." The image of America's biggest star, reduced to a grieving child in military dress, became one of the most poignant moments in entertainment history. Following the burial at Forest Hill Cemetery, Elvis returned to Fort Hood a changed man. Fellow soldiers noticed the transformation immediately. The playful, charismatic young man who had adapted so well to Army life was now withdrawn and haunted. He completed his training mechanically, going through the motions of military duty while his spirit remained in Memphis with his buried mother. When Elvis shipped out to Germany in September 1958, he carried his grief across the Atlantic. His service in Bad Nauheim would be marked by professionalism and dedication, but those close to him knew that the death of Gladys Presley had fundamentally altered the king of rock and roll. The boy who had promised his mother he would take care of her had been unable to save her, and this failure would shadow him for the remainder of his too short life. The death of Gladys Presley, while Elvis served in the Army, represents one of the most profound turning points in the life of America's most famous entertainer. This tragedy in uniform stripped away the glitter and glamour to reveal the vulnerable human being beneath the legend. Elvis's grief, witnessed by fellow soldiers and the world, demonstrated that fame and fortune could not shield anyone from life's deepest sorrows. The experience forever changed Elvis's music, infusing his later performances with a depth of emotion that could only come from genuine heartbreak. The mama's boy who had promised to take care of his beloved mother learned that some promises are beyond human power to keep, and this knowledge would resonate through every song he sang afterward. Ready to explore more untold stories of music? Legends? Subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive content about the human stories behind the stars who shaped our culture. Don't miss the next chapter in music history. Join our community of passionate fans today.